You know, when I was a kid, I used to play a game called Armour, which was one of my favourites, and it was from a company called Bohemia Interactive. And here we are, 15, 20 years later, and they've sponsored our episode of All Patched Up because they are confident they've made the effort required to bring it up to standard. Well, I will be the judge of that one, but they've also provided us some premium currency to give away to you guys. Now, the game is completely free to download. There'll be a link in the top pinned comment, but you can also go to the store and just download it. And if you want to be in with a chance of winning some of that premium currency, just let me know when you've downloaded the game and pop your username into that comment. As well as looking at Vigor again, we're also going to revisit Story of Seasons to see if they've fixed the stuttering problem. Check out Immortals Fenyx Rising's latest flex, and take a look at the new season of Apex Legends, as there was a promised visual upgrade coming. If you've been watching the channel, you'll know that Glen and I take nothing for granted. We're not a big company. We try as much as we can to stay away from clickbait and stuff like that to get views, and hopefully you're just here because you enjoy the content, and we really appreciate it. With that said, let's look at some of the games that have been patched up and see if they've done enough, or should they still be left on the shelf? Well, let's find out. Let's start then with Vigor, and when it originally launched with the Founders Pack after they did a brief beta, while I enjoyed the game, there's one thing that was certainly true, and that's that the visual quality was pretty bad. The resolution was very low. There was one area, the main hub, where the textures and everything looked a bit better, but the frame rate tanked down to around about 20 to 25 frames per second. And when you're trying to practice your shooting and aiming, it just didn't work. It really wasn't ideal. The frame rate drops also affect the motion controls, and I was really impressed that they'd included motion control aiming, but the problem was the frame rate was so inconsistent, it just didn't feel right and it was barely usable in all honesty. Now, as mentioned, Bohemia have sponsored this as they're confident they've made some significant improvements, and well, thank goodness. Thank goodness that's the case, because otherwise this would be seriously awkward. But yeah, there are some real improvements. As you can see from the latest version of the game, the patch number of which will be displayed on the screen, there are a multitude of improvements. Let's start with the frame rates. Now, prior to the patches, the game, as I mentioned, ran at 25 frames per second in the hub area, and it struggled to hit 30 when you were out on missions. In the hub area, this has been drastically improved. It's almost double in some places what it was before. It rarely, if ever, dipped below 30, so it was overall just a much nicer experience. And when you're trying to practice and shoot your guns out on the training range, it certainly helped having a little bit more fluidity. It's worth noting here that the game actually has quite a few new maps from when I first played it, and there are also a couple of new modes, including one that's team-based. But for me, the real experience still remains on those solo excursions where you go out to find and collect loot, potentially meet other players and interact with them with your bullets generally, and do your best to survive. Frame rates are obviously lower in these areas as they're large open spaces, you can run and roam wherever you want, and there are a few more particle effects going on screen. With that said, they managed to stay 30 and above, again for 95% of the time, whereas before you were lucky to get that for 20. There's definitely an improvement in the frame pacing, and the frame pacing is also reasonably low so that there's not much input delay, even when you're using motion or gyro controls, which by default will add in a certain amount of latency. You will still experience a couple of minor stutters, but overall the pacing and frame rates are improved across the board. Now that's fantastic news and, in all honesty, a blessed relief. But none of it would mean much if they hadn't done something to tackle the incredibly blurry visuals at launch. Just check these out. Visual quality is hugely improved. Now, they have gone for an anti-aliasing technique to take the jaggy edges off of the outsides of all the surfaces, And potentially this is some form of post-processing, as it does add a little blur, but still the image is much crisper than it was before. You can actually see into the distance now and spot enemies from far away, whereas previously it would just be a distant dancing pixel. The overall improvements to the performance and the frame rate, as well as the image quality, have had a drastic impact on the gyroscopic aiming. I think I may have described it as a drifty nightmare. It's now much easier to aim using that gyro control. And if you set it up just when you're aiming down the sights, it can be the difference between a headshot and getting shot in the head yourself. The matchmaking system is still quite unchanged from when I first played. It will generally take about a minute, maybe a minute and 10 seconds to get yourself into a match, and it's from there that you would use any in-game currency, the gold coins, to add boosters to your player. So you might add some in to improve the amount of gear that you get in that stage. And I like that those boosters actually affect anyone else that's on that map, or put some insurance on in case you die so you don't lose your favourite weapon. Now, texture quality, as mentioned, does look better. It's still not the tippity top, but it's much improved on what it was. The real win here, as I said, is that performance. Load times remain as they were before, if a little quicker, and as it stands I haven't experienced any crashes. The developer seemed to have been able to squeeze out just that bit more visual quality in terms of particle effects and on-screen effects without the degradation of performance that there was previously. If you've been looking for a good shooter on the Switch, or like the pacing of something like DayZ, then this might be a good time to pick this up and give it a go. Remember, it's totally free of charge. Let me know when you've signed up, use the link below if you can. And once again, just a big thanks to Bohemia, and fair play to you for letting us go back and revisit this one after it's been all patched up. Next up, we'll take a brief look at Story of Seasons. Now, Glen enjoyed the game, but he had an issue with stuttering, and let's be honest, there's also some very poor performance at certain points in the game, and there have been a few patches since it launched. Annoyingly, the developer doesn't seem to have patched up that stuttering issue that seems to stem from a frame time inconsistency. The frame time overall is actually very low, but because it's so inconsistent with the rate at which frames are delivered to the player, every now and then you'll just notice this strange stuttering. The frame rate itself is okay. In some areas it's over 30 and tends to be nearing 40 to 45 frames per second, but that's also not the case all the time, and they just need to go back, lock it out at 30 and sort out the rate at which the frames are delivered to the screen. The image quality looks nice and the load times are also decent. It's not a bad experience and it's essentially the same in handheld as well, but no, they haven't fixed the main issue that we had with it. And then we've got Immortals Fenyx Rising. You'll know that I've actually visited this one either once or twice before in a patched up video because they seem to be flexing. Now, there's a few things that I'm going to say about this. Obviously, Ubisoft's name is once again being dragged through the mud. And there's actually something unusual about this latest patch that I do want to talk about. So let's get the good stuff out of the way. In the past, it was very laggy and there were some areas that were 15 to 20 frames per second. I have revisited some of those so we can go through if it's been completely patched up. But as far as the good goes, the frame pacing's better and the overall frame rate is better, but really it's the image quality that's seen the biggest improvement. It looks much sharper, but there are those areas that still, it drops down, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was before. Overall, it's decent, like it looks good, and it is enjoyable to play in both docked and handheld modes. But what do you think of this? When you boot up the latest patch, the game will essentially pitch you a referral scheme so that if you go out and convince some friends to buy the game and they use your code, then you'll get some free in-game cosmetics. That doesn't sit right with me. It does. I mean, how do you feel about it? Am I overreacting? But they're essentially turning you into marketers. Like, I'm not even a fan of stores in games anyway, and that was one of my critiques of the title when it came out. I just don't think it's necessary in a game like this. But now they're trying to corral players into actually going out and doing their job for them with something that's essentially worthless. Like, I know you people like cosmetics and things in online multiplayer games, but in an online solo game, really? So this latest patch introducing that, I don't like that at all. really. I'm not a fan of that. It feels cheap. So I thought I'd mention it. It'll be interesting to see what you think of that down in the comments. The frame pacing is a little inconsistent at times, but overall, as far as the patch goes, the game's looking decent. Last but not least then, let's have a look at Apex Legends. And you'll know that, look, I like the game. I think it's good, but visually it didn't look great at launch. It was one of those where everyone was like, oh, that's not going to function. And, well, it functioned, but it didn't look, no, it wasn't great. Very blurry, very low texture quality. You can see assets streaming in, so when you choose a character, they'll almost load before your eyes. And it's seen a couple of patches, and there's a new version, if you will, of the game that adds new map elements, new gear, all sorts of new stuff. And it was supposed to come with a huge visual improvement. Let's look at the frame rates. So in terms of frame rates, you're looking at around about 27 average, dropping down to 20 and 24. It's just poor. The visual quality is terrible. It's very blurry indeed. You can't see into the distance really. You'll see like a little ant on the horizon moving around, but there's no accuracy when it comes to ranged shooting. Even when you're aiming down sights, it's very difficult. Now they're pretty heavy-handed with the auto-aiming, so you can still enjoy it, and I believe you can filter so that you just play against Switch players. So that eliminates it, but I mean, yeah, it doesn't look great. I mean, you'll let me know, I'm sure. But texture resolution's still pretty sloppy. The frame pacing is all over the shop, so it can go from feeling nice and smooth and maintaining 30 to sudden instability that can leave you feeling a touch nauseous. I like to use gyro controls, as you know, and it's not too bad. The actual gyro implementation's pretty decent, but I'm disappointed with the air quotes performance updates and visual updates that we've got here. It doesn't cut the mustard, I'm afraid. Now, you'll be delighted to hear that I am actually downloading Skyforge in the background, all 23 gigs of it, because a little birdie tells me it may have improved, and I'm a glutton for punishment. So I'll make sure that goes in the next episode. Once again, do go and download Vigor with the link that's at the top of this video if you want to support us, Glen and I and the channel, and it's actually decent now. It's worth playing. They know, and I've said it's still not perfect, so it needs a little bit more work, but not a bad effort at all. Thanks to Bohemia Interactive for sponsoring this one. Don't forget to hit all of the positive buttons if you enjoyed the video. That is now officially a thing that I'm going to say because I like it. And just thanks to all of you for all things Switch. Oh, thanks to our patrons. You guys are amazing. And we've had a couple of new ones. I'll make sure I update the Patreon. I think I messed it up last time. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!